The bridge of the Valiant hummed quietly as it drifted through the darkness of space. Commander Jake Morrison sat in his command chair, watching the stars through the forward viewport. His crew had been on this mission for 6 months now, traveling farther from Earth than any human had gone in 3,000 years. They were scouts, sent to see what had become of the galaxy while humanity hid in the shadows. Jake was a tall man with graying hair at his temples, a veteran of the colony defense forces. He had spent 20 years protecting mining stations and transport ships in human space. This mission was different. This mission was about reconnecting with a galaxy that had forgotten humans ever existed. Lieutenant Danny Price stood at the tactical station, monitoring the sensor readings. He was young, barely 30, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Danny had volunteered for this mission because he wanted to see the aliens his grandmother had told him stories about. Stories she had heard from her own grandmother passed down through generations like ancient myths. "Commander, I'm picking up something," Danny said, his voice cutting through the quiet. "It's a distress signal. Standard Council frequency about 2 million kilometers ahead." Jake leaned forward. The Galactic Council was the government that ruled most of the known species. Humans had been part of it once long ago before the Great Silence. Before humanity decided to walk away from the rest of the galaxy. "What kind of ship?" Jake asked. Danny's fingers moved across his console. "Medical frigate, sir. Council markings. And there are 4 other ships with it. They're not Council design. Weapons are hot." Jake felt his jaw tighten. A medical ship was under attack. He knew what his orders were. Observe only. Do not engage. Do not reveal humanity's presence. But those orders had been written by people sitting safely on Earth, not by someone watching a hospital ship get torn apart. "Battle stations," Jake said quietly. "Helm, take us in. Full speed." The crew moved with practiced efficiency. Alarms chimed softly as the Valiant's weapon systems came online. The ship had been designed to look like an old cargo hauler from the outside, but beneath the disguise was a fully armed warship. Humanity might have been hiding, but they hadn't forgotten how to fight. Lieutenant Kate Palmer sat at the communications station. She was a specialist in alien languages, one of the few humans who had studied the old records. "Sir, the medical ship is Valorian. They're a peaceful species, mostly scientists and doctors. The attacking ships are Zitharan Collective. They've been expanding aggressively for the past 50 years. Jake had read about the Zitharan in the intelligence reports, an insect-like species that worked as a hive mind controlled by a queen. They were conquerors, taking what they wanted and destroying what they couldn't use. The Council's peacekeeping forces had been trying to stop them, but from what Jake had read, they weren't doing very well. "Range to target?" Jake asked. 400,000 kilometers and closing," Danny replied. "The Zitharan ships are firing on the frigate. Its shields are failing." Jake watched the tactical display. The medical ship was helpless, its weapons minimal at best. The 4 Zitharan warships circled it like predators, taking their time. In another minute, maybe 2, the frigate would be destroyed and everyone aboard would be dead. "Decloak," Jake ordered. "Target the nearest Zitharan ship. Fire when ready." The Valiant's disguise flickered and vanished, revealing the sleek predator beneath. The ship's main railgun charged, a weapon that could punch through almost any shield in existence. The human crew had spent 3,000 years in isolation, but they had spent that time advancing their technology, refining their weapons, preparing for the day they might need to fight again. The railgun fired. A solid projectile moving at a fraction of light speed crossed the distance in seconds. It hit the first Zitharan warship dead center, punching through its shields as if they weren't there. The ship exploded in a brilliant flash of light. The 3 remaining Zitharan vessels turned toward the Valiant, their weapons pivoting. They were fast, Jake had to give them that, but they had been hunting a defenseless medical ship. They weren't ready for a real fight. "Missiles away," Danny announced. All tubes firing. A dozen missiles streaked from the Valiant's launch bays. The Zitharan ships tried to evade, but the missiles were smart, tracking their targets with cold precision. 2 more enemy ships vanished in explosions. The last Zitharan warship tried to run, its engines flaring as it turned away. "Should we pursue?" Danny asked. Jake shook his head. "Let it go. Someone needs to spread the word." The bridge fell silent as the crew processed what had just happened. They had revealed themselves. The mission parameters had been clear. Observe but do not engage. Jake had just thrown those orders out the airlock, but as he looked at the damaged medical ship, still intact and still alive, He couldn't bring himself to regret it. Kate. Open a channel to the medical frigate, Jake said. Kate worked her console, then nodded. Channel open, sir. Medical vessel, this is Commander Jake Morrison of the Terran ship Valiant. Your attackers have been neutralized. Do you require assistance? There was a long pause. Jake could imagine the confusion on that alien bridge. Terran. Human. A species that shouldn't exist anymore. That had been gone for so long most people thought they were just stories. Finally, a voice came through the speakers. It was high-pitched, melodic, translated by the computer into English. This is Dr. Keelan of the Medical Frigate Sanctuary. We require medical assistance. Our life support is damaged. But you are human? The humans from the old stories? We're human, Jake confirmed. And we're here to help. Stand by for rescue operations. He closed the channel and looked at his crew. They stared back at him. Some excited, some nervous. All of them knowing that everything had just changed. Humanity had been a legend, a myth whispered in the dark corners of alien bars. Stories of the warriors who had fought in the ancient wars, who had been unstoppable in battle, who had vanished without explanation. Now those legends were real again. Get damage control teams ready, Jake ordered, and someone send a message to Earth. Tell them we've made contact. Tell them the galaxy still needs us. As his crew moved to carry out his orders, Jake returned his gaze to the viewport. Somewhere out there, that surviving Zetheran ship was running home to report what it had seen. The news would spread fast. Humanity was back, and they had just reminded everyone why they had been legends in the first place. The question now was whether the galaxy would welcome their return or fear it. Olivia Grant had spent 15 years studying dead languages and ancient texts. She was a historian, a linguist, and one of the few people in the Galactic Council who believed that humans had been real. Most of her colleagues had laughed at her research. They said she was wasting her time studying fairy tales. Now those fairy tales had just destroyed 3 Zetheran warships in under 2 minutes. She stood in the briefing room of Council Station Apex, the massive space station that served as the government center for 1,000 worlds. Around her sat representatives from dozens of species. The mood in the room was tense. Some looked excited, others worried, and a few looked outright hostile. Admiral Threnax of the Draconid species stood at the front of the room. He was 8 feet tall, covered in red scales with golden eyes that burned with intensity. The Draconids were warriors by culture, and Threnax had commanded the Council's defense forces for 20 years. He was not happy. These humans appear without warning, engage in combat without authorization, and now claim they want to help us, Threnax said, his voice a deep rumble. Where were they when the Zetheran began their conquest? Where were they when the Valorian colonies fell? They hid in the darkness while we fought and died. Olivia raised her hand, standing slowly. With respect, Admiral, humanity withdrew from galactic society 3,000 years ago because of the cost of constant warfare. According to the historical records, they had been fighting for 500 years straight. They needed peace. Then they should have stayed hidden, Threnax replied. We do not need ancient warriors returning to claim glory they no longer deserve. Before Olivia could respond, the chamber doors opened. Commander Jake Morrison walked in, flanked by 2 of his officers. Olivia recognized them from the reports. Lieutenant Danny Price and Lieutenant Kate Palmer. They wore simple gray uniforms without decoration or rank insignia, a stark contrast to the elaborate ceremonial dress of the council representatives. Jake looked around the room calmly. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us, he said. His voice was steady, confident, but not arrogant. I'm Commander Morrison. This is my crew. Threnax crossed his arms. You violated our space. You engaged in combat without council authorization. Explain yourself, human. Jake met the Admiral's gaze without flinching. We received a distress signal from a medical ship under attack. We responded. That's what soldiers do. We protect those who can't protect themselves. Noble words, Threnax said coldly. But words mean nothing without action to support them. You have been absent for 3 millennia. The galaxy has moved on without you. Olivia stepped forward. Commander Morrison, I'm Olivia Grant, council historian and diplomat. I've been assigned to facilitate communication between humanity and the council. Perhaps we should discuss the current situation with the Zetheran Collective. Jake nodded, and Kate Palmer activated a holographic projector. Images filled the center of the room, showing star maps and tactical data. We've been monitoring the situation from a distance for the past year, Kate explained. The Zatharan Collective has conquered 47 worlds in the past decade. Their fleet strength is estimated at over 10,000 ships. They're organized, ruthless, and they don't take prisoners, the council representatives murmured among themselves. Some of the information was new to them, details their own intelligence hadn't gathered. Danny continued the briefing. We've analyzed their tactics and strategic goals. They're not just expanding randomly. They're moving toward the core worlds in a deliberate pattern. At their current rate of advance, they'll reach the primary council systems within 6 months. The room fell silent. 6 months. That was much sooner than the council's projections had estimated. Olivia looked at the data with growing concern. How did you gather this information? Your ships have only been in council space for a few months. We've had deep space monitoring stations running for decades, Jake said simply. We left the council, but we never stopped watching. We wanted to know if the galaxy still needed us. Threnax's expression softened slightly. And you believe it does? Jake pulled up another holographic image. It showed a planet, its surface scarred and burning. This is the Valorian colony world Meridian. The Zatharan attacked it 3 weeks ago. The population was 8 million. Our sensors indicate less than 1,000 survivors. The rest were either killed outright or taken for biological processing. The room reacted with shock and anger. Olivia felt her stomach turn. Biological processing. The Zatharan were harvesting people like crops. We've documented similar atrocities on 17 other worlds, Kate added quietly. The Zatharan aren't just conquering territory. They're exterminating populations and stripping worlds bare. This isn't war. It's genocide on a scale we've never seen. Jake turned off the projector. Admiral Threnax, you're right that we've been absent. We walked away because we were tired of fighting. But we walked away to heal, not to hide. We're not asking for glory or recognition. We're offering to help stop a threat that your current forces can't handle alone. You presume much, Threnax said. But his voice lacked the earlier hostility. What makes you think human warriors from ancient times can defeat an enemy we cannot? Because we learned from our mistakes, Jake replied. 3,000 years ago, we fought everyone. We fought for territory, for resources, for pride. It nearly destroyed us. We left the galaxy to remember what we were fighting for in the first place. To protect the innocent, to stand between the darkness and those who can't defend themselves. That hasn't changed. Olivia felt a chill run down her spine. She had read the ancient texts, the battle reports from the old wars. Humans had been unstoppable fighters, but they had also been brutal, sometimes cruel. The species standing before her seemed different, quieter, more focused. The council will need time to discuss this proposal, another representative said. She was a Valorian, her blue skin pale with stress, but speaking personally as someone whose people are dying, I welcome any help we can receive. Over the next hour, Jake and his officers presented more data. They showed weapon capabilities, ship designs, tactical analysis of Zatharan weaknesses. Olivia watched the council representatives' expressions change from suspicion to consideration, to finally, cautious hope. When the briefing ended, Olivia approached Jake as the others filed out. Commander, may I speak with you privately? Jake nodded and his officers stepped away. Olivia took a breath. I've studied human history for my entire career. The records describe your people as fierce warriors, yes, but also as conquerors. What changed? Jake was quiet for a moment. We won our last war 3,000 years ago. Complete victory. Every enemy defeated. And when the shooting stopped, we looked at what we'd become and didn't recognize ourselves anymore. We'd turned into the thing we hated, so we left. We spent 3 millennia learning to be better than we were. And if the council accepts your help? Olivia asked. What do you want in return? Nothing, Jake said simply. We're not here for territory or power. We're here because a medical ship called for help. And we couldn't ignore it. That's all. Olivia studied his face, looking for deception or hidden agenda. She found none. The legends said humans were unstoppable in battle. Are you? Jake smiled sadly. We're very good at fighting, but being good at something doesn't mean you should do it. We fight because sometimes it's necessary, not because we enjoy it. The real strength is knowing when to fight and when to walk away. As Olivia watched Jake rejoin his crew and leave the chamber, she realized something profound. The legends hadn't been wrong about humanity's capabilities. They had just been incomplete. Humans weren't legendary because they were unstoppable killers. They were legendary because they chose to use that power only to protect others. The galaxy had forgotten that distinction. Now they were about to remember. General Linda Hayes stood in the command center deep beneath the Colorado mountains. Above her, on the surface, the old cities of Earth continued their daily routines, unaware of the preparations happening far below. Linda was 60 years old, with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that had seen more combat simulations than actual battles. Until now, that had been enough. "Status report," she said, her voice echoing in the large room filled with holographic displays and computer stations. Captain Sam Turner stepped forward. He commanded the destroyer Harbinger, currently in orbit undergoing final systems checks. "Ma'am, we have 48 warships ready for deployment. Another 30 will be ready within 2 weeks. The Mars shipyards are running at full capacity, but we're dealing with equipment that hasn't been used in generations." Linda nodded. When humanity had withdrawn from the galaxy, they had deliberately dismantled their war machine. Shipyards became factories for civilian vessels. Weapons foundries were converted to produce farming equipment and construction materials. It had been a conscious choice to become something other than warriors. Now they had to remember how to make weapons again. Marcus Webb, the chief engineer responsible for reactivating the orbital shipyards, approached with a tablet. He was younger than most of the senior staff, barely 40, with the eager energy of someone who loved solving impossible problems. "General, we've got the automated manufacturing systems online. The problem is raw materials. We're stripping asteroid mining operations to get enough metal for ship construction." "How long until we can match pre-silence production rates?" Linda asked. Marcus hesitated. "At current capacity? 2 years, maybe 3. The infrastructure exists, but we have to rebuild supply chains, retrain workers, and restart facilities that have been dormant for millennia." Linda felt the weight of that timeline. According to the intelligence reports from Jake's team, they had months, not years. "Do what you can. Focus on destroyers and fighters. We need quantity and speed." Across the solar system, humanity mobilized. On Mars, the great shipyards that had once built 100 warships per month groaned back to life. On Europa, weapons laboratories staffed by scientists whose grandparents had only known peace began testing designs pulled from ancient archives. Throughout the asteroid belt, mining stations diverted their resources from civilian projects to military needs. On the destroyer Harbinger, Sam Turner watched as his crew ran combat drills. Most of them had never fired a weapon in anger. They had trained in simulations, studied tactics from old battles, but never faced an actual enemy. Sam himself had spent his career commanding cargo escorts and patrol ships in human space, dealing with the occasional pirate or smuggler. Lieutenant Danny Price, transferred from the Valiant to help train the new crews, stood beside Sam on the bridge. "They're good," Danny said, watching the tactical display as the crew ran through attack patterns. "Fast learners, good instincts." "But they're scared. Are you scared?" Sam asked. Danny thought about it. "Yes, but I'm more scared of what happens if we don't fight. I saw what the Zetheran did to those colony worlds. I saw the bodies floating in space. If we don't stop them, that happens to everyone." Sam understood. Fear was natural. Fear kept you alive. The trick was not letting it control you. On Council Station Apex, Olivia Grant worked around the clock to bridge the cultural gap between humans and the Council species. She organized meetings, translated documents, and mediated disputes when misunderstandings arose. The work was exhausting but vital. An alliance built on mistrust would collapse at the first sign of trouble. She sat across from Admiral Threnax in a small conference room. The Draconid warrior had been skeptical of humanity, but the intelligence data they provided had been accurate. 3 Zetheran attacks had occurred exactly where human projections predicted. That had earned some respect. "Your people fight differently than we do," Threnax observed. "Council forces engage with honor. We announce our presence, we give enemies the chance to surrender. We minimize civilian casualties. The old human battle records show none of this restraint." Olivia chose her words carefully. 3,000 years ago, you would be correct. Humans fought to win regardless of cost. But we learned that winning battles doesn't mean anything if you lose yourself in the process. Modern human doctrine emphasizes protecting civilians and minimizing unnecessary destruction. Yet your weapons are designed to kill efficiently, Threnax countered. Your railguns punch through any shield. Your missiles never miss. These are not the tools of a defensive force. Having the ability to kill and choosing when to use it are different things, Olivia said. Humans learned that lesson through terrible experience. We're very good at violence, Admiral. That's exactly why we're careful about when we employ it. Threnax was silent for a moment. My people value strength in battle. We respect warriors, but we also value honor. If humanity fights alongside us, I need to know they will fight with honor. We will, Olivia promised. Not because we're required to, but because we choose to. That's the difference. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Kate Palmer worked in the intelligence division analyzing Zetheran communications. She had cracked their encryption protocols weeks ago, and what she found kept her awake at night. The Zetheran weren't just expanding randomly. They had specific targets, and Earth was on that list. She brought her findings to Jake, who was coordinating with Earth Command. "Sir, you need to see this," she said, displaying the translated messages on his screen. "The Zetheran Queen knows about us. She knows Earth's location, and she's marked it as a priority target." Jake read the messages, his expression darkening. They remember the old wars. More than that, Kate said. The Queen is 3,000 years old. She was there when humans last fought. She remembers what we did to her forces. This isn't just expansion anymore. For her, it's personal. She wants revenge. Jake forwarded the intelligence to Earth immediately. The strategic situation had changed. This wasn't about helping the Council anymore. This was about survival. The Zetheran were coming for humanity, whether they fought back or not. General Hayes received the news in her command center. She looked at the deployment schedules, the production timelines, the training rosters. Everything was too slow. They needed more time. "We don't have more time," she said aloud, though no one had spoken. She opened a channel to all human ships and facilities. "All personnel, this is General Hayes. I'm authorizing emergency production protocols. Civilian manufacturing is hereby converted to military use. All reserves are being called up. Every ship that can fly, every weapon that can fire, every person who can fight. We need you now." Across human space, the response was immediate. Civilians volunteered by the millions. Retired soldiers returned to service. Engineers worked triple shifts. The species that had spent 3,000 years building peace began preparing for war again. And they did it with the efficiency that had once made them unstoppable. On the Valiant, Jake received reports of the mobilization. 48 warships had become 70, then 90, then over 100. Ships that had been mothballed for generations were being brought back online, crewed by volunteers who understood what was at stake. He also received reports from Council Space. The Zetheran were advancing faster now, as if they knew humanity was preparing to fight. 3 more worlds had fallen in the past week. The Council's defensive lines were crumbling. Jake called his senior staff together. "The Council has officially requested our assistance. Earth has authorized full military deployment. We're going to war." Danny looked at the strategic map. "With respect, sir, we're outnumbered at least 20 to 1. The Zetheran have thousands of ships. We have hundreds, which is why we're not going to fight fair," Jake replied. "Council forces fight with honor, with rules. The Zetheran fight to exterminate. We're going to fight smart. We're going to use every advantage we have, every trick we've learned, every weapon in our arsenal." Sam Turner, joining the meeting via video link from the Harbinger, spoke up. "The Council won't like that approach. They have protocols, rules of engagement." "The Council can keep their protocols," Jake said flatly. "We're not fighting for glory or honor. We're fighting to keep people alive. That means we do whatever works, whatever it takes. The Zetheran want to make this a war of extinction. We're going to show them why that was a mistake." As the meeting ended and his officers returned to their duties, Jake looked at the star map showing Zetheran positions. The enemy was vast, powerful, and utterly ruthless. But they had made one critical error. They had reminded humanity why they needed to fight. The galaxy was about to remember what human warriors could do when they had something worth protecting. The space around Threshold Station was filled with ships from a dozen different species. The station itself was a massive trading hub that served 5-star systems, home to 20 billion people across multiple worlds. It was also directly in the path of the Zetheran advance. If it fell, the core worlds would be exposed and the war would be lost. Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Valiant, watching the defensive formation take shape. 112 human warships formed the center of the line, with Council forces on the flanks. It was the largest human fleet assembled in 3,000 years, and it was still desperately outnumbered. "Enemy contacts," Danny reported from Tactical. 4,086 ships. They're holding position at maximum sensor range. Jake studied the display. The Zetharan had brought a third of their entire fleet for this battle. They intended to break through here regardless of cost. Weapon status? All systems green, Danny replied. Railguns charged, missile tubes loaded, point defense online. Admiral Thrannax's face appeared on the communication screen. The Draconid warrior looked grim but determined. Commander Morrison, my ships are ready, but I must tell you I have never faced an enemy fleet this size. Our projections give us less than a 30% chance of victory. Then we'll have to fight smarter than the projections expect, Jake said. Admiral, have your ships form up on our flanks. When the Zetharan attack, they'll focus on breaking through the center. That's where we'll hit them hardest. The wait was the worst part. Jake had been in combat before, but never on this scale. He watched as the Zetharan fleet began to advance, thousands of ships moving in perfect coordination. They came in waves like a swarm of insects, which made sense given their nature. All ships, this is Morrison, Jake said over the fleet channel. Hold your fire until they're in effective range. Make every shot count, and remember why we're here. Behind us are billions of civilians who can't defend themselves. We're the only thing standing between them and extinction. The human crews responded with quiet acknowledgement. No cheers, no war cries, just calm professionals preparing to do a terrible job because someone had to. Commander Helen Fox sat in the cockpit of her fighter, one of 300 launched from the carrier Defiant. She was 32, with quick reflexes and an instinct for three-dimensional combat that made her a natural pilot. Her squadron formed up behind her as they accelerated toward the incoming enemy. Fox leader to all fighters, she said over her squadron channel. Remember your training. Stay unpredictable. The Zetharan expect us to fight like the Council forces do, in neat formations with coordinated attacks. We're going to fight like wasps defending a nest, fast, aggressive, and everywhere at once. The Zetharan fleet opened fire at extreme range. Energy beams and missiles streaked across the darkness. Council shields absorbed the initial barrage, but several ships took damage. The return fire was devastating. Human railguns reached across space with solid projectiles moving at tremendous speeds. Zetharan shields designed to stop energy weapons did almost nothing against kinetic impacts. Ships exploded, their hulls torn open by projectiles that punched clean through. Contact in 30 seconds, Danny announced. Enemy fighters launching. Helen watched as thousands of Zetharan fighter craft deployed from their carriers. They moved in tight formations, controlled by the hive mind that connected them all. She grinned fiercely. Predictable. Break and attack, she ordered. Don't give them a formation to target. Her squadron scattered, each fighter choosing its own path through the enemy formation. The Zetharan fighters tried to respond, but their coordination became a weakness. They expected enemies to move as a group. When Helen's fighters came from every direction simultaneously, the hive mind struggled to adapt. Helen dove between two Zetharan capital ships, her fighters' guns blazing. She targeted their point defense systems, clearing a path for the bombers following behind her. Explosions bloomed as missiles found their marks, crippling weapons and shield generators. On the Harbinger, Captain Sam Turner commanded a group of 20 destroyers hitting the Zetharan flank. His ships moved in coordinated strikes, appearing out of nowhere, firing, and jumping away before the enemy could respond effectively. It was guerrilla warfare in space, using humanity's superior mobility to offset the enemy's numbers. Target their command ships, Sam ordered. The Queen controls them through specialized vessels. Take those out and we disrupt their coordination. His tactical officer identified a large Zetharan ship in the center of their formation. It wasn't the most heavily armed, but it was surrounded by escorts and broadcasting control signals. Sam smiled coldly. All ships focus fire on that vessel. Full missile barrage. 60 missiles launched simultaneously, saturating the target's defenses. The escorts tried to intercept, but too many got through. The command ship exploded, and suddenly an entire section of the Zetharan fleet began moving erratically, no longer receiving coordinated orders. On the ground, far from the space battle, Sergeant Kyle Mason and his Marine company defended a mining colony on the moon below Threshold Station. The Zetharan had sent ground forces in drop pods intending to establish a foothold and threaten the civilian population. Kyle wasn't going to let that happen. He was a stocky man with a scarred face and 20 years of experience in zero-gravity combat. His company of 150 Marines faced an estimated 5,000 Zetharan shock troops. The odds didn't bother him. He'd fought against worse numbers in simulations. Set up crossfire positions, Kyle ordered, his voice calm despite the situation. Use the terrain. Make them come to us through the narrow valleys. Plant the mines at choke points. His Marines moved with practiced efficiency. They had trained for this, studied the old battle reports, learned from humanity's long history of defensive warfare. The mining colony was built into the rocky surface of the moon, full of tunnels and natural fortifications. Perfect defensive terrain. The Zetheran came in waves, thousands of insect-like soldiers charging across the barren landscape. Kyle waited until they entered the kill zone. Now! Explosions tore through the enemy ranks as the buried mines detonated. Marine marksmen fired from concealed positions, each shot carefully aimed. Automatic weapons created overlapping fields of fire that nothing could cross safely. The Zetheran kept coming, driven by their hive mind, unable to feel fear or hesitation. But Kyle's Marines had something the enemy didn't. They could think independently, adapt to changing situations, and most importantly, they were fighting to protect the civilians sheltering in the colony's underground bunkers. That gave them an edge no amount of numbers could overcome. Fall back to secondary positions, Kyle ordered as the Zetheran finally broke through the first defensive line. Controlled retreat, keep them in the kill zone. His Marines withdrew through prepared routes, leading the enemy deeper into a maze of tunnels where their numbers meant nothing. Every intersection became a death trap, every corridor a shooting gallery. In orbit, the space battle reached its critical moment. The Zetheran had lost over 1,000 ships, but so had the defenders. The human fleet had been reduced to 97 operational warships. Council forces were down to half strength. The Zetheran kept coming, accepting losses that would have broken any other species. Jake watched as a Zetheran battleship targeted the Valiant. Evasive maneuvers. Danny, target that ship's power core. One shot, the railgun fired. The projectile hit perfectly, punching through the battleship's armor and detonating its reactor. The explosion was massive, taking out 3 other enemy ships caught in the blast. Sir, new contacts, Danny reported. The Zetheran Queen's Royal Guard is deploying. 50 capital ships, all heavy cruisers. These are their elite units. Jake had read about the Royal Guard. They were bioengineered weapons, designed specifically to counter every known threat in the galaxy. But those designs were based on data from 3,000 years ago. All human ships concentrate fire on the Royal Guard, Jake ordered. Show them we've learned a few new tricks. The Royal Guard advanced with confidence, their shields absorbing the initial attacks. Then the human fleet deployed their newest weapon, electromagnetic pulse missiles, designed to overload biological systems. The Zetheran had evolved resistance to kinetic and energy weapons. They hadn't evolved resistance to electrical disruption. The missiles detonated and the Royal Guard ships went dark. Their organic control systems scrambled. Helpless, they drifted as human railguns methodically destroyed them one by one. Aboard the Zetheran Queen's flagship, the ancient ruler felt something she hadn't experienced in 3,000 years. Fear. The humans had changed. They had evolved. The weapons she remembered, the tactics she had prepared for, were obsolete. These humans fought with cold efficiency, using her own strengths against her. She sent one final message to her fleet. Retreat. Regroup. The battle was lost. The Zetheran fleet broke formation and fled. Jake ordered his ships not to pursue. They had won, but barely. The cost had been high. 28 human ships destroyed, 15 more crippled. Council losses were even worse. But Threshold Station still stood. The civilians were safe, and for the first time in 50 years, the Zetheran had been forced to retreat. The battle for the Zetheran homeworld lasted 3 days. Jake Morrison watched from the bridge of the Valiant as the combined human and council fleet surrounded the planet where the ancient queen had ruled for millennia. She had retreated here after the defeat at Threshold Station, calling back her scattered forces for one final stand. The fleet that gathered to face her was different from the one that had fought before. Human and alien ships worked together now, their crews learning from each other, sharing tactics and strategies. Admiral Threnax commanded the overall formation, with Jake serving as his second in command. It was a partnership born from mutual respect earned in combat. The Queen's flagship is at the center of their defensive formation, Danny reported from Tactical. She's surrounded by what's left of her Royal Guard and about 1,500 warships. Jake studied the display. The Zetheran were cornered, but that made them more dangerous. We need to end this without destroying the planet. There are civilian hive populations down there who have no say in what the Queen does. Threnax agreed over the communication channel. A measured approach then. We target military vessels only. If we can kill the Queen, the hive mind should collapse. Easier said than done, Jake replied. She'll have the flagship heavily shielded, and she's smart enough to know we're coming for her specifically. Olivia Grant, now serving as a liaison officer aboard the Valiant, spoke up. Commander, I've been studying Zetheran biology and social structure. The Queen controls her forces through psychic bonds, but those bonds work both ways. If we could disrupt her connection to the fleet, even temporarily, it would create chaos in their ranks. Kate Palmer, working at the communication station, pulled up research data. The electromagnetic pulse weapons we used before disrupted organic systems. If we could modify them to specifically target the Queen's psychic frequency, we might be able to sever her connection to the fleet. Jake looked at Marcus Webb, the chief engineer who had joined the fleet to oversee weapons systems. Can we do it? Marcus ran calculations on his tablet. Give me 6 hours and I can modify 50 missiles to carry the specialized pulse. But we'll only get one shot at this. If she adapts to the frequency, it won't work a second time. Do it, Jake ordered. We'll hold position and make it look like we're preparing for a standard assault. Let her think she knows what's coming. The fleet waited as human engineers worked frantically to modify the weapons. Jake used the time to coordinate with the ground forces. Sergeant Kyle Mason and his Marines would lead a boarding action if needed, a last resort if the space battle went wrong. Kyle prepared his team aboard one of the assault carriers. His Marines were veterans now, having fought in a dozen battles since Threshold Station. They had learned to respect their enemy's courage while remaining committed to victory. Listen up, Kyle told his assembled troops. If we have to board that flagship, it's going to be brutal. The Zetheran fight to the death because they literally can't surrender. Their hive mind won't let them. But remember, we're not fighting out of hate. We're fighting to stop a threat. There's a difference, his Marines nodded. They understood. This war had never been about conquest or revenge. It was about protection, about standing between evil and the innocent. In space, the 6 hours passed. Marcus confirmed the modified missiles were ready. Jake gave the order to advance. The combined fleet moved forward in a coordinated formation, human ships at the tip of the spear with council vessels providing support. The Zetheran opened fire immediately. Space filled with energy beams and projectiles. The human point defense systems worked overtime, shooting down incoming missiles and deflecting beams. Several ships took damage, but the formation held. Launch the pulse missiles, Jake ordered. Target the Queen's flagship. 50 missiles streaked across the battlefield, weaving through the defensive fire. The Zetheran tried to intercept them, but Commander Helen Fox and her fighter squadrons ran interference, keeping enemy fighters busy. 43 missiles reached their target. The electromagnetic pulse detonated in a spherical wave that washed over the Zetheran flagship. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, across the entire enemy fleet, ships began to drift, their coordinated movements falling apart. The Queen's control had been severed. It worked, Kate said, amazement in her voice. Their communications are chaotic. They're not receiving coordinated orders anymore. But Jake didn't celebrate. On the tactical display, he watched as the Zetheran flagship's shield suddenly spiked to maximum. Energy readings went off the scale. She's doing something. All ships, evasive action. The Queen's flagship fired its main weapon, a biological cannon that had been charging during the entire battle. The beam of concentrated organic matter streaked toward the Valiant. Jake's ship tried to dodge, but the beam clipped their port side, tearing through shields and armor. Alarms blared as sections of the ship vented atmosphere. Damage report, Jake called out, gripping his chair as the ship shook. Port weapons offline. Life support failing in sections 3 through 7. Danny responded. But we're still in the fight. Admiral Threnax's voice came through. Morrison, your ship is badly damaged. Fall back and let us handle the flagship. Negative, Jake replied. We finish this together. All ships focus fire on the Queen's vessel. Everything we have. The combined fleet unleashed a devastating barrage. Railguns, missiles, energy weapons, everything in their arsenal targeted the single massive ship at the center of the Zetheran formation. The flagship's shields began to fail under the sustained assault. On the Queen's flagship, the ancient ruler felt her control slipping. The humans had done what she thought impossible. They had cut her off from her children, disrupted the bonds that had held her empire together for centuries. But she still had one option. She could destroy herself and take as many enemies with her as possible. She began to overload her ship's organic reactor. The explosion would be catastrophic, large enough to destroy everything within 100,000 kilometers. Kate detected the power spike. "Sir, she's going to self-destruct. The blast radius will take out half our fleet." Jake made a decision in seconds. "Kyle, this is Morrison. You're going in. Board that ship and stop her. You have 5 minutes." Kyle didn't hesitate. "Understood. Marines, let's move." The assault carrier launched, racing toward the Zatharan flagship. Point defense fire tore at its shields, but it pushed through, slamming into the flagship's hull and deploying boarding tubes. Kyle and 50 Marines stormed into the enemy ship. The interior was like something from a nightmare, all organic corridors and biological systems. Zatharan warriors attacked immediately, but Kyle's Marines pushed forward with ruthless efficiency. They had trained for close-quarters combat in hostile environments. This was exactly what they were good at. "Follow the energy readings," Kyle ordered. "The reactor should be at the ship's core." They fought through corridor after corridor, losing Marines to the defending Zatharan. Kyle felt each death like a physical blow, but he kept moving forward. They had a job to do. Finally, they reached the reactor chamber. The Queen herself stood there, a massive creature 15 feet tall, her ancient body scarred from countless battles. She radiated psychic power that made Kyle's head hurt. "You cannot stop this," she said, her voice translated through their communication devices. "I will take you all with me." "Maybe," Kyle said, raising his weapon. "But we're going to try anyway. That's what we do." His Marines opened fire, but the Queen's personal shields absorbed the shots. She laughed, a terrible sound. Then a railgun projectile punched through the wall, fired from the Valiant outside. The Queen's shields flickered, weakened by the external attack. Kyle saw his chance. He threw a plasma grenade at the reactor controls, not at the Queen. The explosion destroyed the overload mechanism, preventing the self-destruct. The Queen roared in rage, but she was mortal now. Cut off from her fleet, her power broken. "It's over," Kyle said quietly. "Surrender." For the first time in 3,000 years, the Zatharan Queen felt something other than confidence. She felt defeat. Slowly, she lowered her armored limbs in submission. The war ended not with a massive explosion, but with a simple act of surrender. Without their Queen's control, the Zatharan fleet stopped fighting. The hive mind that had driven them to conquer began to fracture into smaller, independent groups. Jake stood on the bridge of the badly damaged Valiant, watching as Zatharan ships powered down their weapons one by one. "Stand down," he ordered his fleet. "Cease fire. It's over." 6 months later, Jake stood in the council chambers on Station Apex. The room was filled with representatives from every member species, along with several Zatharan groups who had petitioned to join the council as independent colonies free from the old queens. Controlled, Olivia Grant stood beside him as they formalized humanity's return to the galactic community. But this time it was different. Humans weren't joining as conquerors or as warriors seeking glory. They were joining as equals, as partners in maintaining peace. "The Council officially welcomes humanity back," the presiding officer announced. "Your contribution to ending the Zatharan threat will not be forgotten. You have proven yourselves worthy allies." Jake gave a small speech about cooperation and shared responsibility.